This is 8 Minutes, a podcast helping you understand the energy and climate challenge in just a few minutes. I'm your host, Paul Schuster. It's easy enough to look at a wind turbine or a solar farm and think about the impact on climate, but it may be a bit more of a stretch when it comes to your morning latte. The reality, though, is that our food system is a huge contributor to greenhouse gas emissions, and the dairy portion of that food ecosystem is particularly important. In this episode, I sit down with Ashley Allen, Chief Sustainability Officer of Oatly, to discuss not only what they're doing to decarbonize their products, but how they're encouraging their customers to think about food choices and the handprint that each consumer has on the planet. 8 minutes. It's how long it takes the sun's rays to hit Earth, or about twice as long as it takes my local Starbucks barista to load me up with a venti quad iced white mocha with oat milk. Hold the whip. Let's get it on. Ashley Allen, thank you for coming on to the podcast.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Ashley, I am really excited to talk to you today and learn a little bit more about yourself, a little bit more about Oatly. Maybe we can start there. And if you could give a general overview of the company and then maybe you and your role within the company.
Sure. Well, Oatly is a plant-based company. I would say an oat-based company, as our name suggests, based in Sweden, but with a presence all over the world, with a mission to really bring people oat-based products that can replace dairy products in their everyday diets.
Yeah, my wife was super excited to hear that we were talking today, as she's been trying to convince me to take up alternative milk options. So part of this conversation is, I'm certain, going to be cultivating me into this entire philosophy. So I'm looking forward to it. Ashley, what is your role at Oatly? Give us a little bit of background as to who you are and your role at Oatly as well.
So I am the Chief Sustainability Officer at Oatly, which means I oversee our sustainability mission and our global sustainability department. And that's such a critical role at Oatly because sustainability really is embedded within our mission and is a core value. And we really look at our existence and our purpose as a company as the ability to really help change the food system, change the way people think about food, and reduce the impact that traditional dairy has in the world.
So you started off there talking about how sustainability is embedded in Oatly, and certainly if anybody recognizes the brand and has purchased some of your products at the supermarket or wherever, they'll actually see, sustainability numbers on the packaging itself, your carbon footprint or things like that. Tell us a little bit about how important this is to Oatly and the role that sustainability has as both a brand as well as a company.
Yeah, I mean, really, sustainability is in many ways Oatly's reason for being. It's something that we feel that we deliver in value on top of our products. So not just that we are selling oat milk, but we are actually bringing, sustainability value to our customers, to consumers, to the planet. The way we sort of look at how sustainability fits into the company is this ambition to embed sustainability throughout every department so that it's really fully integrated into how we do business, into all of our business decisions. And the way we go about that is really, connecting across every department within Oatly, whether that be finance, supply chain, which we actually call sustainable operations. So they actually have sustainability in their name. Marketing, which we actually call Oatly Department of Mind Control, interestingly, and just any of the departments within Oatly, really looking at how does sustainability fit into what they do on a day-to-day basis, and how are they then accountable for bringing sustainability into their work. So that's something that we have consciously undertaken from the top, with clear direction from our leadership, from our CEO, from our board, that this is something that, is part of Oatly's value, Oatly's promise, and therefore something that we bring into everything that we do.
part of what I talk to some of my customers about frequently is how going back 10, 15 years or so, like digital used to be like this separate type of operation that companies would kind of think about as kind of like their own part of organization. And now today, digital seems to be embedded throughout everything that a company does. Sustainability is today's digital, right? You know, many organizations kind of think of it as kind of being separate. They've got their own little organizational structure, et cetera. What I love about the way that you just described Oatly's philosophy is really embedding it throughout, you know, and to a certain point, making it part of the existence of the brand in so many different ways. I love that. I love that. So, Ashley, with your permission, let's talk about kind of that ethos of Oatly and specifically around the role of food and the food value chain on the planet and on climate change. How do you think about that at the company?
Well, I think it's pretty surprising to many people who care about climate change and know a bit about, you know, what's driving climate change in our world, to know that the food system actually drives around 1/3 of global greenhouse gas emissions. And then diving a little bit deeper, when you think not just about climate change, but also about air quality and the like, the food system actually drives around 1/3 of global methane emissions, which is considered, you know, a super climate pollutant. The animal-based sector within that is a really huge driver. In fact, livestock is the number one driver of methane emissions globally. And so having that perspective and realizing that some of these big global challenges that we face, whether it's climate change, air pollution, biodiversity loss, things like that, that what we eat and drink on a daily basis really has a significant impact on those global challenges. And that's really quite surprising to some people who have heard mostly about, you know, the energy transition, the transportation change that's being made in electrification. But to really stop and think, food, what we eat, that really is a key driver of some of the biggest challenges of our day through the way that we really operate the food system today. And therefore it's broken and we need to fix it.
You know, it's interesting that you bring that up because to many, the energy transition is simply doing the same things that we've been doing, but with different technology, right? You know, we're purchasing electricity from solar panels on our roof versus purchasing it from a utility. We're still driving a car. It just happens to be an electric car, et cetera. You're actually talking about changing the way people think about their type of food and the way that the way that they eat. You know, tell me a little bit more about how you guys think about the role that the consumer plays in terms of their decision making as it relates to agriculture and climate change.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it all comes down to, you know, what's on our plate, what's in our diet. And really fundamentally, it's a sort of change in the way we think and a change in our behavior, in what we see as sort of our day-to-day, the things that we eat and drink. I think the beauty of this transition and the beauty of what needs to be done is that what companies like Oatly are doing is looking to make that change as easy as possible for people. And so that's what really can, you know, spur behavior change and really lead to that system shift, is making it easy for a person to simply swap out, you know, some major facet of their diet. So swap out the milk that they drink or the cream that they drink in coffee with an Oatly cream or an Oatly barista. Swap out, you know, their ice cream with plant-based ice cream. Mm-hmm. You know, it's those sort of day-to-day choices that companies like Oatly try to, within our product portfolios, make that switch easy, make that swap easy by providing products that are high quality, that are comparable nutrition, and that also taste and feel and provide the same experience as a person would be getting from the original product that they consumed. And so that's the real beauty of this transition. And I think in a way you can sort of look to parallels in the energy transition, in the transport transition, where you try to make it fairly seamless for people, and you try to make it a fairly easy switch to move to that more sustainable option. That's really what we're doing.
Yeah, and in many ways, it ends up being a better product at the end of the day, anyways, right? An EV, an electric vehicle, something I'm a little bit more familiar with, tends to be a better product than an ICE vehicle. And oat milk, speaking as somebody who has to worry about my cholesterol on a daily basis, is much better for you than a milk-based variety. So I love it. I want to come back to this idea of the consumer, et cetera, but it's not just the switch over from an animal-based product to a plant-based product as well. There's an entire life cycle of even getting it to the market in the first place. So then, Ashley, beyond just the impact that the food and agricultural system is having on climate, I'm certain that they're being affected by the climate changes that are occurring as well, and the weather issues and increased temperature. How do you as Oatly think about that with your suppliers and your farms that you work with?
Absolutely. I often say that when it comes down to it, farmers are really on the front lines of climate change. Their day-to-day livelihoods are dependent on the weather, on water availability, on the heat and cooling cycle and things like that. And we've spoken to so many farmers that we work with that are actually experiencing this in real time. And so I want to first of all just acknowledge, how important farmers are to our lives, to companies like Oatly, and that it's really not only about changing the impact that agriculture has on the world, but also recognizing that as we are working to combat climate change, that is also something that is needed in order to help and build resilience among farmers and their livelihoods. So we really try to take that perspective when we partner with farmers in agricultural projects, not only looking at how we can reduce their impact, but also trying to find ways that we're helping to build the resilience of the crops that they're growing, so that they can be more resistant to the kinds of changes that could happen because of climate change.
Yeah, we refer to it as mitigation and adaptation in our role, both in terms of mitigating the impact that we're having and then adapting to the fact that things are changing. Are there any examples that you might be able to share in terms of how you're doing something like that?
Well, one more of a sort of general systemic example is when we look at regenerative models of agriculture and regenerative practices with farmers. Many of those practices can have both an adaptive and a mitigating impact. So, for example, if precision input of different chemicals and fertilizers is something that's part of the regenerative package, that also can help farmers in a time of stress that they don't have to spend as many resources on some of these big inputs. Or in terms of irrigation, now most oats are rain fed, but you can understand that in a climate change scenario, it might require more water of farmers. So if there are if they are already working on water saving measures, then that could also be helpful in a climate change scenario where you might not have as much water availability.
So let's dig a little bit deeper into that life cycle, from farm to factory to retailer to consumer, and how Oatly's entire ethos focused on that value chain as well, how you're starting to affect how these products come to market in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think every company should really have this reflection on their sustainability work. You have kind of two parts to that work. And I think to date, companies have been ignoring the part that interacts with consumers. And that's, what we started talking about, what we'll probably go into in more detail later on. You have to have that piece of thinking about what kind of change are you actually driving in the world with people. But additionally, the more traditional perspective on what sustainability means in a company is really looking at your value chain, looking, as you said, all from the inception of the ingredients, so from farmers and producers throughout the world, all the way along that supply chain, what goes into and out of your factories and your co-manufacturers' factories, all the way to what actually ends up on the shelf and all the logistics in between. And it's from taking that perspective that a company can identify what's most material along that pathway that has, either negative impacts on the planet or on people, or provide some opportunity for change. And then looking at what can we actually do about it? What can we actually do to change it? So when Oatly takes this look from our farmers all the way through to our customers and consumers, we sort of break it down in 3 areas. The first area is really around the food system. How does the agricultural food system need to change in order to meet this definition of what a more sustainable, better for people, better for the planet food system should look like in the future? In that area of the value chain, we really engage with farmers in particularly oat farmers, because that's our key ingredient. That's overwhelmingly the ingredient that is in our products is oats. So how can we support farmers in our main sourcing areas in Sweden, in the US, in Canada, in the UK? How can we support them with growing oats better, using less inputs, saving themselves money, adding to their income opportunities, and improving their local environment? So that area for us is really about regenerative agriculture. We call it our future agriculture renovation movement, because the regenerative term can be a bit loaded. So
say that again. Say that again.
Future agriculture renovation movement, the farm. So we chose renovation because it's really about, sort of renovating the way things are working, bringing in some practices from the past, as well as some practices of the future, and making sure that is farmer led. So really working with our mills and the farmers that supply them to identify what opportunities did they see, whether it's cover cropping, whether it's precision input of fertilizers, whether it's reductions in fertilizers or pesticides, a number of different changes that they can make. And we want to support them in that effort. So that's kind of that core piece of that food system. As we move along the value chain then, and we look at the factory, what we call as a sort of future company, how can we operate? What's our operations and our co-manufacturers' operations? How can we operate as a future company? What does a future company do in their treatment of the people who work there and in their treatment of the environment? That's pretty much bread and butter for a lot of companies. You're looking at reducing waste. You're looking at saving water. You're looking at saving energy and switching to renewables. So those are the main pieces that are really critical for every company to take on, in addition to really paying attention to how you're treating your people. And one of the things that we do is we try to take this work on sustainability and really engage everyone at every level in the company, to help them understand how they contribute to these goals. So in that operations piece, ensuring that, the engineers, the factory workers, the logistics managers, that everyone understands, how can my job contribute to sustainability outcomes, and really, of course, making sure that they're treated fairly and inclusively and have a safe place to work. And then finally, moving down the value chain and really looking at our interactions with customers and consumers. And this is, what we started talking about before, thinking about the plant-based revolution and having that engagement with customers in particular about what kind of choices can they make and how Oatly can help them bring the plant-based products to more people. So starting with what animal-based products can you swap out? And then can we do that in a way that is not adding an additional financial burden on somebody, not adding a surcharge? And then looking at, okay, now could you envision a world where you only provided plant-based options for that particular, whether it's a menu item or store item, and just being on that journey with them to just figure out how do we kind of take this transition together. And it's through that look across the value chain that a company can really understand both how can they improve their own footprint, whether it's climate footprint or other environmental issues, but also how can you have a better handprint on the world? How can you make a more positive impact in your engagement with customers and consumers?
I like the term that you're using, handprint. Could you help the listeners understand a little bit more about the way consumers make choices and the impact that that has? It's brought us full circle now. Okay, gone through the value chain. Okay, we're back into the consumer and the decision making process that they're making in this handprint that they have.
Yeah, absolutely. The way that I look at handprint, and it's a bit of an emerging concept, I'll admit. So I'm sure that there are many experts that are starting to define it in different ways. But I really look at handprint as what is the impact that a company can have outside of its direct value chain, or at least outside of its scopes 1 through 3, if you're looking at climate change. So that really is where someone is taking your product or taking your services and then using it, and that becomes part of their own impact, their own footprint. So ultimately, it's really about helping others reduce their impact on the world, or have a better impact on the world. So for climate change, what this means is, if you are providing a particular product, doesn't have to be a food product, but obviously in our case, we're talking about oat milk. What are you replacing? If you're selling that product, what are you replacing in the world? What should people move from in order to move to your product? And so in our case, that really is about enabling people to switch from cow's dairy products to oat-based products. Mm-hmm. In another sector, it could be, technology. Maybe you're helping someone switch to a, uber more efficient model of a particular technology, or maybe skip that technology altogether and leapfrog to like your new way of doing things. Maybe an example is like, and I don't know the energy impact, but maybe an example is completely helping the world swap to streaming from shipping DVDs all over the place.
I think that's a wonderful example. Okay, just as long as they're purchasing renewable energy for all of those cloud-based services.
But here's the thing. I mean, this is what you're pointing out. So once you do that, once you say, here's the handprint I want to have, here's the impact I'm making, then you have to commit to actually measure it. So then you're no longer only measuring the impact that you have or your product has. You're measuring the counterpoint, the counterexample. And so you have to commit to actually looking at and measuring and understanding, in our case, what impact does a liter of cow's milk have on the environment, and making sure that it's truly as a comparable example as possible. So ensuring that you're looking at, same geography, same amount, that you're looking at the most common use case, things like that. So that's where life cycle analysis, or LCA, comes in, because you can take this life cycle based assessment and compare two different options that a person might have, whether it's in their diet or whether it's in their sort of day-to-day technology use or whatever it might be. And you can compare the life cycle impacts of those two things to show what are the pluses and minuses, where is one better and over another. So that's what we've done most recently at Oatly, is we've done a series of LCAs on comparing our various oat milk products to cow's milk products in different geographies around the world, and sharing what the difference is in the impact. Not only looking at climate impact, that's what we lead with, that's what we want to share, that's what's really sort of both resonating with the world and is this, major existential issue that we're all facing. So we share that information on the climate impact and product carbon footprint, and putting that in our products. But in our LCA that we publish, we also look at water impact, land impact, pollution impact, a whole host of different issues, so that a consumer, or obviously a very informed consumer, or scientific experts or business owners, others can look at that data and say, okay, truly, here is the impact between these two different product choices.
Yeah, I would imagine that it's challenging to get that information out to consumers to the point where they understand it and they can make informed decisions around that. Like, how do you think about your consumer as their role within this? Obviously you want them to change, but there are challenges to getting them to that point, right? What is Oatly doing to help consumers understand and make that transition?
Well, Oatly's approach has always been to be as transparent and direct as possible. We really like to have this direct conversation with consumers through out of home billboards or Super Bowl ads or direct on package messaging, and just share some of this, pretty nerdy and pretty weedy stuff. And so we put the product carbon footprints on our products in most cases. And if not on the product, then on the website. And we share our sustainability message, on our cartons in many cases. And we sort of share and publish the information when we commission these scientific studies. Now we know that means like not every consumer is going to have the time to go in and dig in and understand what exactly 0.46 kilograms of CO2 equivalent per kilogram of product means. But it's really more about just starting that conversation and sharing that transparency in an effort to encourage other companies to do the same. You could almost think of it like when the world started sharing calorie information on products. So no one probably really was thinking day to day at that point, that long ago, exactly what a calorie meant to them. But it became a means for comparison once all products started doing that. And then, people kind of got more educated on it and they understood. And now, we have a lot more knowledge about how calories fit into our lives and what things, are high calorie and things like that. So you could look at that for carbon. Wouldn't it be amazing if we had a way to sort of compare climate impact across the products that we consume? So that's kind of one. And then I think beyond that, it's just about having the direct conversation and using climate impact and that data to really spur a curious conversation about the impact of food and the kinds of behavior changes that are needed.
Yeah. What I love about that, especially the calorie perspective, is Oatly has always been, maybe aggressive is the wrong word or whatever, but you haven't been shy about taking on and embedding, carbon and sustainability within the fabric of the company. And there's, for those who don't know, you can Google this. Oatly bought 2 billboards in New York City. And Ashley, I'm gonna fumble this a little bit. Okay, so you may be able to give me a better description as to what exactly you did. But on one of the billboards, they sat there and said, "This is the carbon footprint of Oatly's products." And on the other billboard, they sat there and said, "Hey, we reserve this space for all of you dairy companies out there. Go ahead and feel free to put your own up here as well," right? And I love that, right? This is a brand that's getting out there to sit there and say it's more than just it's more than the product that you're purchasing and the price of that product and the natural things that we're thinking about. Here's something that's important to an increasingly large set of consumers. It's important to the planet in so many different ways. Like how do we embed this within how we go to market? And so I find that really interesting. Let me know if I got that billboard thing wrong, by the way.
No, you got it. And you got it. And I would say the real point there was definitely not to call any one particular company or individual out or anything like that. It was really more to make the point that this is an area that we all need to understand much more. What is the impact of what we eat? And the only way that we can do that is by companies being more transparent around what that impact is. Now, not every person is then going to make a decision solely based on that impact, of course, but it's just one more in the series of information that a person can bring in and consider and think through when they are making the choice of what works best for them in their diet and their lifestyle. So it's just that one more piece of information that we really want to be open and transparent about. And we want people to know and start engaging that conversation so that they can make the most informed choices about what's best for their lifestyle.
Yeah. What I find interesting is that you're not just challenging the consumer to make more informed choices, but you're also challenging other companies to step up to the plate as well. What would you like to see other companies in your space do to follow the lead of Oatly?
Well, first of all, I should say believe me, Oatly is not perfect, and we do not have this all figured out. And I think any company who has taken a deep dive into greenhouse gas accounting can admit that the rules are changing on a monthly basis, and you're always discovering new things, new sources of emissions that you need to bring in or calculate, things that have changed, things in the outside world that have changed, like the sources of energy that a country may rely on, things like that. So it's a constantly evolving field, and we all need to have a lot of humility, that we are all figuring this out, and Oatly is definitely no exception to that. So we are committed to transparency, but certainly not claiming perfection by any stretch of the imagination. So what we'd really like to see then is for more companies to take that sort of fearless attitude. I think that there's in the last couple of years, there's been a little more fear in terms of companies' willingness to share their environmental information, to share their environmental footprint, to really sort of go deep and really admit the things that are working, celebrate the things that are working, but also admit the things that aren't working, and seek support and help. And I think, unfortunately, what that's caused is that we're not recognizing the real difficult tasks that we have ahead of us, and we're falling short in terms of where we need to go in terms of combating climate change, and other things. And so for companies to be more transparent, to commit to publishing their full greenhouse gas inventory or carbon footprint, whatever you'd like to call it, scopes 1 through 3, so everything. Also, for companies to consider what is their handprint, or what could it be, what should it be, and more to share this information with people through their products is really what we'd like to see when it comes down to it.
And then how would you recommend consumers to think about this, as they're thinking about their own choices? Certainly we've touched upon it, but how should they be thinking about their actions going forward, broader, maybe even just than the choice as to whether they're going to use oat-based milk versus dairy-based milk?
Right. At a personal level, and I do this in my own day-to-day life, I think it comes down to the fact that none of us are going to make perfect choices. We all have an impact on the environment. It's something that we all need to contend with. None of us have a zero impact life, and it depends on a whole lot of factors. But by even just starting to consider and bring into our choices the consideration around what is the environmental impact of this food or this technology or this transportation choice, to me, that helps at least start guiding us in the right direction. And we also have to realize that these kinds of solutions look different for everyone. So one person's pathway, whether it's toward the plant-based revolution, come on, join us in, or whether it's other choices that they're making with their lives, no one's pathway is going to look the same. And so really just starting to think through your own lifestyle choices, where you have some flexibility, trying new things, what are some things you can switch out, I think is where a consumer can really sort of step in and say, how can I really contribute to being part of the solution to things like climate change? I think in addition to that is, demand companies to be transparent. Tell companies that you care about these issues. Tell them about what issues you do care about, and demand that you want to see the information. Also, be willing to accept that companies aren't perfect, but just that we should all be getting much more willing to share about what the environmental impacts of the things that we make and do.
It's a journey. So it sounds like if you're a company out there thinking about your own sustainability journey, transparency, making certain that greenhouse gas inventory is out there, the LCA type of activity that you're doing in terms of really deeply understanding the impact each of your products or services is having on the environment, understanding your own handprint and how that translates through to the customers and consumers. And then on the consumer side, recognizing that it's a process, making those choices and seeking out the information, the data that you need to understand your own impact, and realizing that it's not it's not a huge shift. All right. Similar to the first conversation that we had around the energy transition, about how we're purchasing electricity from solar panels, or we're now driving EVs or whatever. It's not a huge shift to shift over from from dairy milk to oat-based milk, and the process to that. But it can have such an immediate and viable impact in so many different ways. Ashley, thank you for joining me on the podcast today. Really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you so much.